This actually gets to our final subject that I wanted to discuss with you, which is political correctness and comedy, and comedy's usefulness as a vehicle or as a tool to educate people, especially on the plight or the experience of marginalized communities that don't necessarily get a lot of mainstream attention. And you obviously have done a remarkable job in, as you mentioned, educating people on trans identity and trans issues, and have done an incredible job in like bringing people closer to understanding trans people and advocating for trans rights and trans causes. Now, I asked you about this because before we even got on, I said, did you watch the latest Dave Chappelle like stand-up comedy? And you said no. I'm assuming you have not watched it since we talked.
I've not watched it. I've seen the excerpts that are about trans people. I haven't watched the whole special.
Yeah, and I thought, look, I'll be completely honest. Dave Chappelle and Aaron McGruber were incredibly influential in my development and my understanding of like black culture in America, because I didn't grow up in America. I grew up in Turkey, so that was my only insight into the disenfranchisement or marginalization of African Americans. And it's not the greatest educator, but for me it was profoundly influential in the sense that I learned a lot of. Like I developed a lot of my perspective by using that as a launching pad, like using that as a platform to dive deeper into these sorts of issues. So I think that comedy is profoundly important in that sense, especially when educating people about the marginalized identities and the struggles they go through. But having said that, it obviously can, the person who's communicating this message can, after a significant amount of capital or after a significant amount of time has passed, can be a little out of touch.
I agree with you about Dave Chappelle. I mean, I think that he's probably a comedic genius. Yeah. And in the early 2000s or late, I loved his comedy. I loved his show. I think that some of his, what is it? I forget, there's one of his old specials. It's like Killing Me Softly. Yeah. I think that's one of the greatest, stand-up sets of all time. But I think that Dave Chappelle talking about trans people is not Dave Chappelle at his finest, and he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's kind of stuck at this very basic level that he can't get past, and he could just not do the trans jokes because he obviously doesn't really have anything very incisive to say about it. And so it's actually, I'm just sort of embarrassed for him watching him rehash the same old I identify as Asian, like Ricky Gervais on stage in 2015 just did I identify as a chimp. Like how many hack comedians have already gotten up on stage to do the I identify as something wacky joke about trans people? Like everyone's doing that. They've been doing it for years. And so, I think if this were any other joke, if it was not transphobic, we would accuse the comedians doing it now of stealing it because it's not a new joke. But for some reason, people just have infinite patience for doing the exact same transphobic joke again and again and again. And so part of me suspects that this is not, does anyone really find that joke hilarious anymore? It's almost more of this kind of stubbornness, it seems to me. Like they resent having been told not to make the joke. And so they're going to keep making it out of spite. But is that really funny? It's not. I don't think it's very funny. I think it's very tiresome. I think it's overplayed. I think it's unoriginal. And it kind of, you hate to see it from someone as fine a comedian as Dave Chappelle. Yeah, no, you nailed it. Like, I mean, you talked about it in the darkness in the video that you made about comedy in general and like political correctness, which I highly suggest you guys check out. It's great. But like there is dark humor to be. There is obviously something funny about trans existence as well as every other form of existence. Like you can find humor in everything, even in the darkest corners of any form of marginalized identity. But there's a difference between like a really racist black person joke, for example, and like a very funny
joke that could be misconstrued and potentially is like bordering on the edge, that comes from a place of understanding the experience. And you're right, I that's how I felt when watching Dave Chappelle do the like, oh yeah, like, oh, I identify as a woman. Well, what if I identify as a Chinese person? Like, it's just, it's so played out. It's like the attack helicopter meme over and over again. And it's like, if your comedy is basically plagiarized from 4chan message boards, then that kind of sucks, dude. You got to get better.
Yeah.
And that comes from understanding.
And Dave Chappelle, he keeps saying, like, as if it's this thing that he's insistent that we acknowledge. He's like, you have to admit that, trans people, the predicament they're in is hilarious. Well, I agree, it is hilarious, but the funny, I'm a woman who used to be a man. Everything about that is hilarious. But I feel like there's a lot more to that than just like, oh, I identify as something weird. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not really the funny thing about being trans. The funny thing is, I talk about in my video, The Darkness, there's a video where the trans YouTuber Gigi Gorgeous, who's this like, femme, beautiful trans woman, talks about like how she had to go to a sperm bank for she's trying to have a baby. And being a woman in a sperm bank, that's hilarious. That's worth 10 minutes on stage as a comic. But that's not what Dave Chappelle's doing, because he doesn't know about that. He doesn't know anything. All he knows is a meme from 2012, and it's just kind of disappointing as someone who enjoys comedy to see that that's the best we can come up with.
Yeah, in the sense, I feel like on the one hand, I feel like political correctness does have a capacity to ruin a comedy. Sure. I do think that, like a lot of people are quote sniping, or they're not allowing people to fail. They're not, and failure is a big part of the comedic process. I'm not a very funny person, but I try to be, and also I love comedy. I watch a lot of comedy, and a failure is a big part of that process. And if you're not allowed to fail, if you're not allowed to bomb, if you're not allowed to like make jokes that might come across as bad or edgy at times, then you're not gonna be great. You're not gonna have a refined, tight 5-10 minutes or an hour. And then on the other hand, however, the outrage culture against the backlash against PC culture has also led comedians to be more lazy, because now you have one of the greatest comedians of our generation, if not the greatest comedian of our generation, one of the greatest comedians of all time, basically doing cheap seat bits like, trans people bad, haha. Like, and there were brilliant bits in that, in his even his newest special. But that stuff was so lazy, and that's what's going to draw the crowd, and it's probably going to draw the wrong kind of crowd. There was one about the F word and the N word, where he was like, "Well, I'm not an N word. Why can't I use the F word?" And it was like, well, okay, what about a white person using the N word then? Like, okay, you say you're not an N word, and I understand what you're trying to say, but and gay people are not the F word. Right? I'm confusing you a little bit, but because I can't use hate speech, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what your opinion is. But like it's literally the same as like a white person being able to use the N-word and using that as a defense. Is such a weak, like, it's just not good cultural criticism. And that's what comedy is at its heart. I was gonna play a bunch of George Carlin clips, but unfortunately we're running out of time. Do you have any other opinions on this, like really quickly before we go? I know this is an important topic and I wish we could talk a little bit more about it, but.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's a more important topic than people usually give it credit for, because I think that if you look at like sort of the culture war that we're in right now, and I think politics often has a culture war around it, like political correctness might be the most important like dividing issue. As far as comedy, I agree with you that I think that the excesses of outrage online make it very difficult to be a comedian, because to be funny, you have to, what makes a lot of jokes funny is that they kind of sort of balance very delicately on a line between, the acceptable and the unacceptable, and the perverse and the weird. And it's hard to do that if you're worried that if you fall, the consequences will be really bad. But at the same time, yes, I think that part of your job as a comic is to listen to audiences and to understand, to learn from your mistakes. And I see a lot of comics not doing that. I see Ricky Gervais doing the same transphobic jokes for year after year after year, or Dave Chappelle doing the same transphobic jokes year after year after year. And that to me seems like their failure as a comic, right? It's their failure to really listen to their own audience. It's their failure to really make jokes in a thoughtful way. So I think everyone can stand to improve.
Thanks for watching this free clip of the Young Turks. Don't forget to become a TYT member today. For more exclusive content, join now at tyt.com/join.